Hi, it's Ros, back for a bit of a scallydandle with renewed enthusiasm after a slump of a couple of weeks where I've sort of disappeared a bit. Don't expect anyone noticed, but you know, I say that just in case you were wondering. And scallydandling today to Brazil and Austria. Having said that, I would say that where we're really going in these two books is somewhere into the depths of the female consciousness. Yeah, and if that puts you off, then you can go off and do something else right now. But that's the reason why it feels kind of natural to talk about these two books together. Also, the fact that I read them quite close together in time, and they really kind of like knocked up against each other in my head, I suppose. Now, what are the two books? One is was published in 1964, and that's by Clarice Lispector, and it's The Passion According to G.H. And I read that as kind of like an informal buddy read with Noah of Everyone Who Reads This Must Converse, and Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics. And the other book is Malina by Ingeborg Bachmann, and that was published in 1971. And that book was one of my choices for this year's Read German Books project that's been led by Greta and Mel, and I'll link below to them so you can kind of see what that's all about rather than talk about it anymore. But it's certainly carrying me off in some interesting and different directions. But why am I talking about these? Yes, why is it reasonable to talk about these two books together? It's always risky, isn't it, when you talk about a pair of books? You kind of end up comparing them, and it's probably going to become obvious that there is one of these books that I like more than the other. No, like is a bit of a... Like's a really kind of like... It's a word like nice, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those sort of pretty little, slightly meaningless words. One of these books kind of... had even the most meaning and fascination for me, but they're both really tremendous books, so don't let that kind of sway you to one or the other. Oh, and I do hope that there are some people out there who read these books and might comment and help me understand them even more, because these are not books for the faint-hearted, I would say. Yeah. Now, let's think a bit about Bachmann and Lispector. So, they were both born in the 1920s and they both died in the 1970s. So, relatively young. They're both originally from kind of like that similar part of Central Europe. Bachmann was born in Austria and Lispector was born in the Ukraine, but in a part of the Ukraine that used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, if that makes sense. So they've got kind of a common culture, and I think you do see that in their writing, even though Bachmann stayed in Europe, in Austria and France, whereas Lispector went as a small child to Brazil, but then was very widely travelled and lived in Europe, in the States as well as Brazil. But yeah, they come, I think, both of them from a certain kind of European writing tradition, maybe. Yeah, I don't think it's any accident, for example, that in the Lispector you get hints of Kafka, maybe. Yeah, even though she's kind of almost like, yeah, very much a Brazilian author that Brazil kind of hold in great pride as one of their national authors, I think. And lucky them to have an author like her. The cat is going to keep meowing in this. I may have to pick her up. I may have to let her out of the room, but we won't worry about that. But if you hear squeaking, let's let her out. Let's get rid of her. Go on, cat, off you go. Shoo! We're talking about books here, not feeding you. Someone in the house will take pity on her and feed her. Don't worry. Don't feel sorry for the cat. She's constantly indulged. So, back to the books. Now, I was saying they came from originally from a similar part of Europe. Another really weird coincidence about these two women authors is that they both at one point fell asleep with a lighted cigarette and injured themselves really badly, and in fact that was probably the cause of Bachmann's early demise. Bachmann's known more for poetry and plays. This is her only completed and published novel. Well, yeah, published completed novel. Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? She had another unfinished one. Whereas the Lispector is 5th of her 9 novels. I'm working my way through them. They're both, now, reasons why it's kind of that's sort of some of their commonalities, but reasons why you might reasonably kind of compare them as novels. They're both first-person narratives, and they both feel like they're written... well, you know, when you have a first-person narrative, sometimes you feel, to an extent, it's like the author is talking directly to you. It's not literally memoir, but it is, you feel like it's them, it's their thoughts, their thinking in many ways, and I think that's true of both of these books. Oh, I haven't shown you either. I haven't done the wave a book around thing. Okay, there is The Passion According to G.H. It's one of those lovely Penguin modern classics. I really like them. They always have a nice bit of relevant artwork on the front. Malina, I've had on the Kindle, so I can't show you a real book, but there, oh, and I'll try not to get too much glare. That's if you can see it. Hold it still so it actually focuses. Similarly, lovely Penguin modern classic translation with a very appropriate. If you read the book, you would know that was a very appropriate image on the front. I like a kind of paperback that's been made with a bit of love. Yeah. Even when I'm reading it on Kindle. That's a bit illogical, isn't it? But what really matters about these two writers, these women writers, and why, I kind of think about them together, and reading their books close together was really a powerful experience for me, is that they are both extraordinarily intelligent women. You know, the kind of women where you're reading what they write and you're thinking, you're kind of struggling to keep up, but you're glad to be there and experiencing that. It's like they're not like us normal mortals, but aren't we lucky that they were around and wrote things for us? You know, like you sometimes feel with sort of like Virginia Woolf, say, that kind of a writer, that where you're just a bit blown away by them, really. Both these books feel like, I'm trying to think how to put this. It's like these were books that they needed to write. They write as if their life depends on it. If that makes sense. You know, it's not done with a view to who's going to read this, how well it's going to sell, which market it would fit in, what their editor's going to say. I mean, I'm sure their editors did have things to say, but you know what I mean? And there are just no concessions made to their readers, really. Now, I don't mind that. If the ideas are interesting enough and the quality of the writing is high enough, then, I may be struggling to keep up, but I'm happy to be there for the ride, and I will do my best. Not everyone wants to read like that, and that is fine. Reading has a variety of purposes, doesn't it? And I wouldn't want every book I read to be like that. You know, some things, it's almost like medicine, best taken in small doses, books like these. Do you like that sort of reading experience? Does that work for you? Or do you think, oh, for goodness sake, just write me something nice that I can enjoy reading? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe is it sort of, are the writers that write like that, are they self-indulgent? And readers that read like that, are we kind of like masochistic? I don't know. No, I think I get loads out of it. I just have to put a bit more effort in. So, before I talk about each book, I'm going to just put a word out for the people who translated these two books, because you will already have gathered, I think, these cannot have been easy books to translate. The Bachmann was translated by Philip Boehm. Good. I don't think I've read anything else he's translated, but I would look for translations by him again. I thought he did a really fine job. The Lispector translator, Idra Novey, she really has my 100% admiration. There's a little translator's note at the back of this book, and in it she says that she was introduced to Lispector as a reader. She read her books, including The Passional Interchange in particular, and was so fascinated and challenged by the books that she learnt Portuguese so that she would be able to read Lispector's own words rather than a translation, and then went on to translate them. God, hats off to you, Idra. Absolutely. Good job there's people like that around to kind of translate things for lucky people like me to read. So let's talk about a bit about both books. Malina is in 3 parts, and parts 1 and part 3 are about, kind of about this. The first person narrator character is a writer. She's apparently a talented person. She's a bit, it's kind of very stream of consciousness-y, but they're also very much about an obsessive love affair that she has with one man, Ivan, and her relationship with a second man, who's the eponymous Malina, who we're really not sure, I think, as a reader, whether he is an incredibly kind of forgiving, caring, supportive person, or as the book progresses, you actually start to think, or is he actually quite cruel and controlling? Is he quite a dangerous character? Yeah, it's there's like huge uncertainty there, and you're seeing it kind of through the eyes of a very unreliable first person narrator, if that makes sense. The middle section of the book is something else. Now, it's basically, it launches into a dream sequence. Now, I don't know about you, and you tell me, but for me, dream sequence in a book, instantly I think, oh my goodness, no, please don't give me a dream sequence. This is a kind of natural, immediate turn off, a bit like child narrators, and there's certain things that you just think, oh boy, was I wrong in this case. I mean, this is the dream sequence to convince you that they have a value, I suppose. I'm going to read you kind of from the beginning of it. And this section is called The Third Man. So we know we've had her lover and the man she lives with. The third man kind of turns out to be her father, but it's not quite as simple as that. Okay. Malina shall ask about everything, but I answer unasked. This time the place is not Vienna. It is a place called Everywhere and Nowhere. The time is not today. In fact, the time no longer exists at all, because it could have been yesterday, it could have been long ago, it could be again, it could be forever. Some things will have never been. The units of this time into which other times are compressed have no measure, and there is no measure for the non-times in which things enter that were never in time. And then we go into the dream. Yeah, I decide they should be the dreams of this night. And her father appears, and she's in somewhere called the Cemetery of the Murdered Daughters. Yeah, you can see it's dark. And we quite quickly move from there into gas chambers. You've got to remember this is an Austrian book written in the 1960s, probably. It was published in 1971. She's from a generation of Austrians who had to come to terms with what their parents had done in the war. You know, her father was a Nazi, or a member of the Nazi Party, you know. And basically we go off into this kind of like mental fugue about fascism and patriarchy. And if that sounds dreadful, as I say, you don't have to read the book, but I thought it was absolutely the best part of this book. It was the bit that really was knockout for me. The other two parts, I think I have a bit of a problem with books where they're about a woman that is predominantly defining herself in terms of her relationships with men. And that's my complaint about this book, which is probably an unfair complaint, because actually, you know, that has been the reality of women's existence often over time. But it's probably one of the reasons why I preferred the Clarice Lispector. So on to that one. Now, if you thought there wasn't like a whole load of plot in the Bachmann, wait till you get to Lispector. So I will summarise the plot of Passion According to GH for you. Woman gets up. It's the first day after her maid has left. She decides to go into the maid's room in her apartment in Rio de Janeiro to have a bit of a tidy up and a sort out. She's surprised by how empty and tidy already it is. She starts thinking a bit, accidentally crushes a cockroach that is coming out of the wardrobe, does a lot more thinking, decides to taste the kind of juices that come out of the crushed cockroach, and has a kind of spiritual epiphany. She, as she describes it, she was baptised by the world. So what do we make of that? Well, we don't. But there is so much richness of idea and language in this book that takes us through that one day with that woman and that bizarre experience. It is quite a spiritual book, and that's interesting for me because I'm not a very spiritual person. I don't believe in God, you know, that's all not me. But actually, I suppose I grew up with enough of that in my culture to quite enjoy when she uses almost like biblical language and rhythms. And it's not a kind of a really, it's not like a religious conversion. Her sort of, it's a kind of, it's more about finding, as I say, come to terms with some things in her consciousness. Now, I have to say, the thing about Lispector, she's very subtle, and she doesn't give you tidy explanations for things ever. You know, it's the ideas that interest her. It's almost like she's almost unpicked those ideas to the point where you can't really tell where as if she started with a sort of logical sequence of thought, and by the time she's bled it onto the paper, that's gone. Like, for example, at one point the first person narrator talks about seeking an abortion, and in a more obvious book it would be like, she got an abortion, this left her with psychological trauma, this is why she's having this sort of strange spiritual experience a few years later. No, it's not that. She doesn't go there. She doesn't do it like that. Again, she's off on this sort of extraordinary kind of philosophical discussion, and then at one point, and the narrator's having all this sort of deep, you know, reorganisation of herself almost, and yet at the same time, at one point, she says, "I'll probably go out drinking and dancing tonight." You know, it's like just when you think it's never predictable. It's never predictable. I'm going to read you a tiny bit of this as well. It's indulgent, but if you've stuck around this far, then you either read and loved these books or you're genuinely interested in them. So, yeah, to give you an idea of how I mean when I say it's a spiritual book. Okay, it's not for us that the cow's milk flows, but we drink it. The flower was not made for us to look at or for us to smell its fragrance, and we look at it and smell it. The Milky Way does not exist for us to know of its existence, but we know of it, and we know God. And what we need from him we elicit. I don't know what I'm calling God, but thus he may be called. Does that give you a little tiny flavour? Does it tempt you to read it? I hope so. People sometimes talk about muscular writers, don't they? In fact, usually perhaps male writers they say that about. I would say that Lispector, she's not a muscular writer. She's like her books. It's almost like she does an autopsy on the ideas and the characters in her books. You know, it's like she it's not just like she goes beyond skin deep. She's like going right in there. She's pulling out the organs. She's getting through the muscles to the skeleton. Yeah. It's hard to convey, I suppose, quite how interesting I find her writing. Now, the Lispector ends in quite an uplifting way, which is a lovely and interesting and not overly tidy ending, but a satisfying one. The Bachmann, Malina, ends in a very dark and mysterious way, and my plea at the end of this video is, if you have read it and you think you understand what is happening at the end of that book, please I really want to hear your differing opinions, because I was quite unsure, and I did wonder whether it kind of threw the whole book into question for me, as to who was who and who'd done what. And yeah, if you've read it, you'll understand. That's quite enough of talking about those two books, and I hope I've inspired you to read them if you like that kind of thing, and if you have read them, I'm looking forward to hearing your comments.